5,000 years ago, the Sumerians wrote down a number, 384,400 kilometers. That's the exact distance between Earth and the Moon. NASA confirmed it in 1969 when Apollo 11 measured it with lasers. But here's the problem. The Sumerians had no telescopes, no satellites, no way to physically measure this distance. And they didn't just write it down as a random fact. They said a god named Nana measured it, a god who descended from the sky in a celestial boat, a god who brought them this knowledge from the heavens. How did an ancient civilization with Bronze Age technology know something that modern science only confirmed half a century ago? Before we get started, make sure to subscribe. I cover ancient mysteries and forbidden history every week. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The Sumerians didn't invent writing to record poetry or tell stories. They invented it to document something far more urgent. Knowledge from the gods. Around 3200 BCE, in the city of Uruk, scribes began pressing wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets. This wasn't art, it was data preservation, and the data they were preserving came from beings they called the Anunnaki. These weren't metaphors or mythological archetypes. The Sumerians described them with the precision of eyewitnesses. They recorded their names, their ranks, their genealogies, and their technologies. One of those technologies was celestial measurement. The earliest cuneiform tablets weren't grocery lists or tax records. They were astronomical observations, star catalogs, planetary movements, mathematical calculations that tracked celestial bodies with obsessive detail. The Sumerians created entire schools dedicated to scribal training, where students spent years learning to read the heavens before they learned anything else. These weren't priests playing with astrology. They were technicians maintaining a database that predated their civilization and needed to be preserved at all costs. The god Nana, also called Sin in later Akkadian texts, wasn't just the moon deity in the abstract sense. He was described as the physical custodian of the moon itself. Sumerian hymns say he traveled between Earth and the moon in a boat that sailed the night sky. His temple in Ur, the ziggurat of Nana, wasn't just a place of worship. It was an astronomical observatory. And inside that temple, priests kept detailed records of lunar cycles, eclipses, and distances. One of those distances was 384,400 kilometers, written in their base 60 number system, preserved on clay, and treated as divine knowledge handed down from Nana himself. The priests who served Nana weren't religious figures in the way we understand them today. They were astronomers, mathematicians, and record keepers who worked in shifts around the clock. They tracked the moon's phases with such precision that they could predict eclipses years in advance. They knew the moon's orbit wasn't perfectly circular. They understood libration, the slight wobble that makes the moon appear to rock back and forth from our perspective. And they recorded all of this in mathematical formulas that modern astronomers can still verify as correct. This wasn't guesswork. This was data collected by someone who had actually been there. Let's put this in context. The ancient Greeks, often celebrated as the fathers of astronomy, tried to measure the Earth-Moon distance around 2,300 years after the Sumerians. Aristarchus of Samos used geometry and came up with an estimate. He was off by a factor of 20. Hipparchus tried again a century later and got closer, but still missed by tens of thousands of kilometers. Even Ptolemy, working in the 2nd century CE with access to centuries of accumulated observations, couldn't nail down the precise figure. His calculations placed the moon anywhere between 34 and 64 Earth radii away, a range so wide it was practically useless for navigation or prediction. It wasn't until the 1960s, when NASA bounced laser beams off reflectors placed on the moon by Apollo astronauts, that humanity confirmed the precise average distance. 384,400 kilometers. The same number the Sumerians wrote down 5 millennia earlier, and here's what makes it even stranger. The moon's distance from Earth isn't constant. It varies by about 43,000 kilometers between perigee and apogee as it follows its elliptical orbit. The figure the Sumerians recorded isn't the minimum or maximum, it's the average, which means they didn't just measure it once. They tracked it over time, calculated the variations, and determine the mean distance. That requires not just one observation, but hundreds, maybe thousands. Mainstream archaeology explains this away as coincidence, or they claim the translation is disputed. But the tablets exist. The number exists, and the context exists. The Sumerians didn't just randomly write down large numbers. Every figure in their astronomical texts corresponds to something measurable. Lunar months, solar years, planetary orbits. Their math wasn't guesswork. It was advanced enough that it forms the basis of our modern timekeeping system. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle, all inherited from Sumerian base 60 mathematics, and this same system recorded the Earth-Moon distance with shocking accuracy. But here's where it gets stranger. The Sumerians didn't claim they figured this out themselves. They explicitly credited Nana, and they described how he did it. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, which predates the Bible by over 1,000 years, there are references to gods using instruments that measured the heavens. The Anunnaki are described as possessing tools that could calculate distances across the sky. One text describes a device called the ME, which translates roughly to divine decrees or cosmic laws, but also refers to technological objects used by the gods. These ME were not metaphysical abstractions. They were physical devices, often depicted in carvings and cylinder seals, as handheld objects emitting light or beams. Zechariah Sitchin, the controversial scholar who translated many of these texts, argued that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial beings who came to Earth roughly 450,000 years ago. According to his interpretation of Sumerian cosmology, these beings came from a planet called Nibiru, which orbits our Sun on a 3,600-year elliptical path. Mainstream academics dismiss Sitchin's work as pseudoscience, but his translations of the actual Sumerian tablets are harder to refute. The tablets describe the Anunnaki as sky people. They describe vehicles that roar and emit fire. They describe beings who wear garments that shine like the sun. And they describe advanced knowledge of astronomy, metallurgy, and genetics that shouldn't exist in the Bronze Age. What makes Sitchin's work particularly controversial isn't just his alien hypothesis. It's that he presents linguistic evidence that's difficult to dismiss without actually engaging with the source material. He points to Sumerian words like din, jach, ij, iej, ja, ijir, which mainstream scholars translate as gods, but which Sitchin argues literally means righteous ones of the rocket ships. He highlights depictions on cylinder seals showing beings descending from the sky in what appear to be capsules with flame trails beneath them. He notes that the Sumerian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, describes the formation of the solar system in a sequence that matches modern planetary formation theory better than any other ancient text. Critics argue Sitchin's translations are selective and that he ignores context, but they rarely offer alternative explanations for the specific anomalies he identifies. How did the Sumerians know about outer planets? Why do their texts describe genetic engineering, specifically the creation of humans through mixing divine essence with earthly clay? Why do they depict what look like DNA helixes on 4,000-year-old cylinder seals? The mainstream response is usually silence, not refutation. If you ignore the word God and replace it with advanced being, the Sumerian texts start to read less like mythology and more like historical documentation. Nana didn't measure the moon because he was a divine spirit. He measured it because he had the technology to do so. The celestial boat wasn't a metaphor, it was a craft, and the knowledge he brought down from the heavens wasn't supernatural revelation, it was scientific data. The question becomes, why did the Sumerians need this number? What practical use did knowing the Earth-Moon distance serve in 3000 BCE? The standard answer is, they didn't need it. It was purely religious or symbolic. But that doesn't hold up under scrutiny. The Sumerians were obsessed with precision. Their agricultural calendar was so accurate it allowed them to predict floods, droughts, and harvest cycles years in advance. Their architecture used geometric principles that modern engineers still study. Their legal codes were detailed enough to cover property disputes, inheritance laws, and trade contracts. These were not people who wrote down useless information. One possibility is navigation. If the Anunnaki were indeed extraterrestrial or even just highly advanced, they would need precise celestial measurements for navigation. The Earth-Moon distance is a foundational data point for calculating orbital mechanics. It's used in modern space missions to determine launch windows, gravitational assists, and landing trajectories. If you're traveling between worlds, you need to know where those worlds are in relation to each other. And if you're teaching a primitive civilization astronomy, you start with the basics. The distance to the nearest celestial body. Think about what it takes to calculate a trajectory to the moon. You need to know the moon's mass, its orbital velocity, its distance from Earth at any given time, and the gravitational forces acting on your spacecraft at every point along the journey. The Apollo missions required room-sized computers to handle these calculations. The Sumerians had clay tablets. Unless someone already had the calculations done and simply told them the answer. Someone who had made the journey before and knew exactly how far it was. Another possibility is that the Sumerians were preserving knowledge for future generations. Many ancient texts contain instructions to protect and pass down certain teachings. The Epic of Atrahasis, another Sumerian flood narrative that predates Noah, explicitly states that knowledge must survive cataclysm. If the Anunnaki knew that civilizations rise and fall, and that humanity periodically loses advanced knowledge, it would make sense to encode critical data into stone and clay, tablets that could survive fire, flood, and the collapse of empires. And what better knowledge to preserve than the measurements of the cosmos? There's also the mystery of how this knowledge spread. The Sumerians didn't exist in isolation. Their influence extended throughout Mesopotamia and beyond. The Babylonians, who came after them, inherited Sumerian astronomy and expanded on it. The Egyptians had contact with Mesopotamian cultures and developed their own advanced understanding of the stars. The Mayans, thousands of miles away, somehow possessed astronomical knowledge that rivals the Sumerians in precision. Their Venus cycles, eclipse predictions, and calendar systems are so accurate that modern astronomers struggle to understand how they calculated them without technology. And like the Sumerians, the Mayans credited gods who descended from the sky. This pattern repeats across ancient cultures. Advanced astronomical knowledge appears suddenly, without a clear developmental progression. The Dogon tribe of Mali knows details about Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, which modern telescopes only confirmed in the 20th century. The Antikythera mechanism, a 2,000-year-old Greek device, is an analog computer capable of predicting planetary positions and eclipses decades in advance. It's so sophisticated that nothing like it appears again in human history for over 1,000 years. And then there are the Nazca lines in Peru, enormous geoglyphs that are only fully visible from the air. Who were they built for if not for beings who could fly? Orthodox historians argue that these are all coincidences, misinterpretations, or the result of lost conventional knowledge. But the coincidences keep piling up. The Sumerians knew the Earth-Moon distance. They knew the solar system had planets beyond Saturn, which wouldn't be discovered by modern telescopes until the 1700s and 1800s. They described Uranus and Neptune in texts thousands of years before William Herschel and Johann Galle observed them. And they depicted the solar system with the sun at the center, a heliocentric model that Europe wouldn't accept until Copernicus proposed it in the 16th century. Let's return to Nana. In Sumerian mythology, he wasn't just a moon god. He was the son of Enlil, the king of the gods, and the father of Inanna, the goddess of war and love. His lineage connects him directly to the ruling Anunnaki council, and his role was specific. He governed time, cycles, and measurement. The lunar calendar used by the Sumerians was based on Nana's movements. 29.5 days per cycle, 12 cycles per year, with adjustments to align with the solar year. This system required precise observation and mathematical sophistication. It also required knowing the exact orbital mechanics of the moon. Mainstream archaeology insists the Sumerians developed this through patient observation over centuries. But the earliest Sumerian records show this knowledge appearing fully formed. There's no evidence of trial and error, no gradual refinement of estimates. The first astronomical texts are already accurate. It's as if someone handed them the completed manual and they just copied it down, which is exactly what the Sumerians claim happened. They say the Anunnaki taught them. Consider the technical requirements for measuring the Earth-Moon distance. You need to understand parallax, the apparent shift in position of an object when viewed from different locations. You need 2 observation points separated by a known distance. You need precise timekeeping to coordinate measurements, and you need trigonometry to calculate the results. The Greeks had all of these tools and still struggled to get it right. The Sumerians, according to conventional history, had none of these tools. Yet they recorded the correct answer. Let's break down what parallax measurement actually involves. You need observers at two different locations on Earth, ideally separated by hundreds or thousands of kilometers. Both observers measure the moon's position against the background stars at the exact same moment. The slight difference in angle between the two measurements, combined with the known distance between the observers, allows you to triangulate the moon's distance using basic geometry. Simple in theory. Incredibly difficult in practice. The timing coordination alone would be nearly impossible without modern technology. How do two observers separated by 1,000 kilometers know they're measuring at the same instant? The Greeks used water clocks and synchronized them before traveling to their observation points. But water clocks drift. Even small timing errors throw off the entire calculation. The Sumerians would have needed something better, something that kept perfect time across vast distances. Or they would have needed someone to simply tell them the answer, unless they had help, unless someone with advanced instruments did the measurement for them and told them the result. Someone like Nana, traveling in his celestial boat, equipped with technology that could calculate distances across the void. The Sumerian texts describe these boats in detail. They glow, they make noise, they rise into the sky on pillars of fire. These descriptions sound less like mythology and more like eyewitness accounts of rocket launches. Now, let's talk about the implications if this is true. If the Sumerians really did receive this knowledge from an advanced civilization, whether extraterrestrial or a lost human culture, it means human history is wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. It means civilization didn't slowly crawl out of the Stone Age over tens of thousands of years. It means there were jumps, quantum leaps in knowledge that can't be explained by natural progression. And it means those leaps were guided. The academic establishment resists this conclusion with everything it has, and for good reason. Accepting it would require rewriting textbooks, rethinking timelines, and acknowledging that our ancestors weren't primitive, that they had access to knowledge we're only now rediscovering. It would also raise uncomfortable questions about who those teachers were and where they went. If the Anunnaki were real, if they gave us astronomy and mathematics and writing, why did they leave? Or did they? Some researchers argue they never left, that the bloodlines of the Anunnaki persist in ruling families, secret societies, and power structures that have existed for millennia, that the knowledge they passed down wasn't meant for everyone, but for a chosen few who would guard it across generations. This ventures into conspiracy territory, but it's rooted in the same texts. The Sumerian king list describes rulers who reigned for thousands of years before the flood. After the flood, lifespans suddenly dropped to normal human ranges. Mainstream scholars dismiss the pre-flood kings as mythological, but what if they were a different species? What if the Anunnaki interbred with humans, creating hybrid bloodlines that inherited both knowledge and longevity? There's a pattern in ancient texts of gods mating with humans and producing demigods or heroes. The Nephilim in the Bible, the Titans in Greek mythology, the Viracocha in Incan legend. These beings are always described as larger, stronger, and more intelligent than normal humans, and they always possess knowledge that seems out of place. Knowledge of the stars, of metalworking, of engineering. Knowledge like the Earth-Moon distance. The ziggurat of Nana still stands today, partially reconstructed in modern Iraq. It's a massive stepped pyramid made of millions of baked bricks. Its base covers over 6,000 square meters. It rises in 3 levels, with staircases leading to a temple at the summit. From that summit, priests would observe the heavens and record what they saw. And what they saw, according to their own records, was Nana descending in his boat, coming down from the moon to deliver knowledge to humanity. Archaeologists treat this as religious theater, a ritual reenactment of a myth. But what if it wasn't theater? What if the priests were recording actual events? If you were an ancient human with no concept of spacecraft or alien life, how would you describe a flying vehicle landing at your temple? You'd call it a divine boat. You'd say a god emerged from it. You'd write down everything he told you, treating it as sacred revelation. Because from your perspective, it would be. The ziggurat's design itself is suspicious. Unlike Egyptian pyramids, which were tombs, ziggurats were functional structures. The summit platform was always left open to the sky. No roof, no covering, just a flat platform oriented to specific celestial alignments. At Ur, the temple of Nana aligned perfectly with the moon's rising point during the summer solstice. The stairs were positioned so that moonlight would illuminate them in a specific pattern during certain lunar phases. This wasn't decoration. This was precision engineering designed to track and perhaps signal to something in the sky. The bricks used to build the ziggurat contained bitumen, a natural tar that made them waterproof and incredibly durable. But bitumen is heavy and expensive. Why use it for a structure that's not near water? Unless the builders knew the structure needed to last thousands of years. Unless they were building something meant to survive multiple civilization collapses. A beacon, a landing pad, a monument to the gods who came from above. The number 384,400 kilometers is not an approximation. It's not a symbolic figure. It's the actual average distance between Earth and the Moon, accurate to within a fraction of a percent. The Sumerians wrote it down 5,000 years ago, crediting a god named Nana. NASA confirmed it 50 years ago using laser ranging technology. The gap between those two data points is almost 5 millennia of human history. And in all that time, no civilization came close to that level of precision until we developed modern instruments. Except the Sumerians. Who said a god told them? A god who measured it. A god who came from the sky. So what does this mean for us now? It means we should take another look at ancient texts, not as mythology, but as history. Not as primitive superstition, but as eyewitness testimony filtered through a limited frame of reference. When the Sumerians say the Anunnaki came from the stars, maybe they meant it literally. When they describe flying vehicles and advanced tools, maybe they saw them. When they record precise astronomical data that shouldn't exist, maybe someone gave it to them. And when they warn us, in texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh, that knowledge can be lost and civilizations can fall, maybe we should listen. Because here's the final uncomfortable truth. We're not the first advanced civilization on this planet. We might not even be the second. There's evidence of catastrophic events that reset human progress multiple times. The Younger Dryas impact, around 12,800 years ago, triggered global climate collapse and mass extinctions. The flood myths that appear in every culture on Earth, from Sumeria to China to South America, describe a world-ending deluge that wiped out previous civilizations. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a megalithic site that predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years, was deliberately buried by its builders, as if they were trying to preserve it for future discovery. What if the Anunnaki weren't aliens from another planet, but survivors of a previous human civilization that achieved spaceflight and then fell? What if they returned after the collapse to restart civilization, teaching the Sumerians what they once knew? The Earth-Moon distance would be basic knowledge for a spacefaring culture. Something you'd teach first, like we teach children that the Earth orbits the Sun. And if you knew catastrophe was cyclical, you'd encode that knowledge in the most durable format possible. Stone, clay, math, so that when the next collapse came, and it always does, whoever survived could rebuild faster. The geological record supports this cyclical catastrophe model. Ice core samples show regular periods of rapid climate change. Sediment layers reveal evidence of massive flooding events. Impact craters dot the planet, many of them far younger than previously thought. And the timeline of human civilization shows curious gaps. Periods where complex cultures simply vanish from the record, only to reappear centuries later with knowledge that seems to come from nowhere. The Sumerians disappeared. Their cities were abandoned, their culture absorbed into Babylon and Assyria, but their knowledge survived, encoded in tablets buried under desert sand, waiting for us to dig them up and ask the uncomfortable questions. Questions like, how did they know? Who taught them? And what else did we forget? The establishment will keep insisting it's all coincidence. That the Sumerians got lucky with a guess. That ancient people were smarter than we give them credit for, but still primitive. Still bound by the limitations of their time. But the number doesn't lie. 384,400 kilometers, written in cuneiform on clay, attributed to a god who measured it, confirmed by Apollo 11. The same number separated by 5 millennia, linking ancient Sumeria to modern NASA with a single undeniable fact. And that fact demands an answer. Because if the Sumerians knew, what else did they know? What other knowledge is buried in those tablets, mistranslated or ignored because it doesn't fit the narrative? The truth is, we don't know. We've barely scratched the surface of Sumerian texts. Thousands remain untranslated, sitting in museum archives and private collections, gathering dust while we argue about whether ancient people could have known what they clearly knew. Nana measured the distance between Earth and the Moon. That's what the Sumerians said, and 5,000 years later, we proved them right. Maybe it's time we start taking the rest of their claims seriously too. Maybe the gods were real. Maybe they came from the sky. Maybe they gave us knowledge we weren't ready for and watched us forget it. And maybe, just maybe, they're still watching to see if we'll remember.